We have lots and lots to cover today. So welcome to our webinar that I am co-hosting with the amazing, the inspiring Marilyn Devonish, known as the Neuro Success Coach. Welcome, Marilyn.
Oh, thank you, Sarah. So happy to be here. I'm really excited about this one. To say it's a favourite topic sounds a little bit odd, but as we progress through the webinar, people will get to understand why I'm so interested in it and why I am still fascinated by this topic. So I'm really looking forward to it.
Yes, well, I mean, this topic, affairs, we're going to talk about betrayal, we're going to talk about cheating. We're going to want to know your questions, so pop them in the chat and we will be checking the chat and seeing what's going on there as well. So yeah, we want to hear from you. So if you've got questions, then do pop them in the chat so Marilyn and I can answer them. We're going to keep an eye on that. But we are going to get stuck in because we've got so much we want to cover today, so many different topics. I know some of you have emailed me in questions already, so thank you so much if you've done that, taken the time to send them in. But as I said, if you've got questions, just pop them in the chat as you're listening to us. So, affairs, betrayal, it's something that I see a lot in my coaching clinic. In fact, every single day. It happens to lots and lots of people. So Marilyn and I were doing a podcast, actually recording the other day, and we were chatting all about this. And we had so much to say that we thought, why don't we do a free webinar so we can share all that experience and knowledge and ideas and different concepts with you guys, as well as answering your questions too. So I know that Marilyn has a fascinating story. Some of you may have heard it on the podcast, but Marilyn, tell us what happened to you, because this was really a humdinger, wasn't it?
Well, from my perspective, and I was thinking about it this morning as I was getting ready, and I still remember the day. I remember where I was standing, and I'd been with my partner for several years. And I don't know if you've ever had a couple that you know where people go, oh my gosh, they're just like the poster couple, you know, so happy, get on so well, just such a lovely relationship. And that was our relationship. People would comment on it and say, oh my God, you guys are so happy, you're so good together, da 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 da. And that's what I thought. And then there was a sort of a little bit of a turning point where he just started being really snappy and really grumpy, and anything I said sort of, you know, threw him off the handle. And I was just like, what is going on here? And I just started a new job. I think it was my second or third day. So I came home, said something, again, really innocent, and it just exploded into an argument. And I'd literally just walked through the door. And I remember he was sitting on the sofa. I walked up and I was standing. He was slightly to my right. I was standing up. And I said, what is going on? Have you met someone else? Are you having an affair? And as I said those words, in my head, I'm like, oh God, don't be so silly. They hadn't even landed yet. And he said, yes, I met someone. And I just remember being kind of frozen. And then I could hear the cogs turning and they were trying to rewind. If you're like you've been at a club, they play a really good track, they go rewind. I actually wanted to rewind that and take those words back, because now I can't fathom what you've just said to me. And I remember saying, what do you mean met someone? Because I'm thinking, I meet people all the time, in meetings, at networking events, you name it, I meet people. And so now I'm standing there and I'm like, please, 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 God, do not let him say what I think he is going to say in terms of the traditional meaning of I've met someone else. So there's this moment which seemed to go on forever. And he said, yes. And he then said the same thing again. So now I'm in a position where I've got to push and go, what does that mean? And then I said, and I didn't want to say it, but now you've opened the door. I said, do you mean you slept together? Now I'm again in my brain. I'm like, please, please, please let the answer to this be no. And he said, yes. And I can remember, if you've ever felt faint, it was surreal. I was standing there, I could see this person, but my ears started blocking up and I felt dizzy and I felt faint. And then I just remember sitting down and I was like, what do I do with this information? This is not what I expected. Coming home from work when all I thought I was going to be doing is sharing the excitement of my new job. So that was where it started. And that then kind of tipped me over the edge. And I contemplated suicide. And I know if someone has never been in that position, to say you contemplated suicide as a result of someone having an affair, for some it might seem trivial. For me, it was everything. And that was how this part of the chapter started. And we did try to, and I use the word try on purpose, we did try again. And I then dragged myself through the relationship for a few years, but it was not pleasant at all. It was just so devastating. When I look back on it now, it almost seems like someone else watching that scenario. But yeah, that's kind of where it started for me. And it was just awful. But however, weirdly, it also coincided with me accidentally, it's a whole long story, won't go into that, accidentally signing up for a personal development training. At that point, I'm still on the brink of contemplating suicide. And so when I realized what I'd signed up for, I said, no, I'm really sorry. This isn't what I signed up for. And I'm not in a good way. They then said, I'd already paid, not realizing I'd signed up for NLP, hypnosis, timeline therapy, HUNA, blah, blah, blah. And they said, come to the training. If you don't get massive value, we'll give you a refund at the end. And the rest, as they say, is history. I went in one end completely broken and contemplating suicide. And I came out the other side like, whoa, there's a whole new world. And I want to help people to overcome what I've just been through. So that's really how it started and where it started.
Yeah, it's true, because those personal development tools that you went off to study at such a fantastic time, really, wasn't it? I mean, gosh, that was amazing. It really were the key to getting yourself back on track, taking your control back, taking responsibility, and helping yourself to get out of that. I mean, that's exactly why we do what we do, right? Those tools are so powerful, and that's why we wanted to share them here today as well. And, you know, one of the things I know that you did differently, because I hear a lot in my clinic, you know, why did it happen to me? And obviously both men and women have affairs. So there's no, you know, I mean, it happens to both. So, you know, if we use the term woman or man, it doesn't mean that it's not the other person too. So you have to be clear with that. But, you know, for example, I see a lot of people saying over and over again in their head, I call them hamster wheel questions. Why did they do this to me? Why does he love her? What's different? What did I do wrong? What did she do that made this so important? Why? I'm wanting the answers. I hear a lot that they can't get closure because they don't have the answers. Now, I know you had a slightly different approach, which I think I've never, ever heard this ever before. So tell us a little bit about how you handled those hamster wheel questions.
Well, the reason I'm smiling, for those of you who maybe, we touched on it in the podcast, I know we'll be people coming in who maybe haven't listened to that yet, but please do. There's two parts to that. And I had so many questions, exactly what you're saying. Who is she? What does she look like? Why her? And I was granular. How many times did you sleep together? What did you do? Seriously, I wanted to know everything because...
Well, why? Because surely that was just giving you like a 3D video image, which is a lot harder to get rid of than just, well, I think it might have happened like this.
Well, at the time, I felt that there were so many unanswered questions that if I could get the answers to those questions, it would be okay. I would feel better about it, because the unknown is really frustrating and annoying. When you're something you don't know, you can go round and round in circles trying to figure out who, what, where, when, how, why, yada, yada, yada. So I sort of thought I wanted answers. So what I did, it must have been complete torture for my then partner. I would actually write my questions down. And because I couldn't speak them, I would then put them into an envelope like a letter. He would come home, we had a big wooden coffee table. He'd glance at the coffee table. You could see his heart sink if there was a white envelope on it, because what it was a list of questions from me. So he would pick those up, take them away, write a response, and then put it back in the same place. So, but that's what I felt I needed at the time, because I could not rest with all of those unanswered questions swirling around in my head. It felt as though they would give me closure. Now, if anyone who's ever been down that rabbit hole, they'll tell you majority of the times, all it does is it opens up another can of worms, because you get a bit more information and then suddenly you're like, well, hold on a minute. And it just goes on and on and on and on and on. But I feel that I was lucky enough, because what that did, at the time, it was too much information. But with hindsight, in terms of the work that I then started doing, it gave me a bit of a unique insight into what's actually going on both sides. But yeah, I used to write letters and leave them there in a particular place to get answers.
Yeah. Gosh, I mean, for me, you know, knowing all that information would probably just run like a movie in my head, and I would find that challenging. I know, you know, some of my clients, you know, that they are already creating imagery in their heads, which is what is driving them so mad. But it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because, is it best, do you think, to get the answers, or is it best just not to know?
The thing I would say is, my suggestion, I would say to people, please don't do what I did, because like you said, it was too much information. To know that they went out for dinner and then had a cigarette after they had sex, that was too much. That's too much, cannot get that out of my head, because like you said, it's like a movie. Some of the fundamentals, however, what happened? For me, how long has this been going on? How many times did you sleep together? I mean, how many times did you sleep together is on the cusp of maybe a little bit too much. But that whole thing about what's going on, because I wanted to know fundamentally what was going on in our relationship that would cause this to happen. Now, I'll be honest with you, I blamed myself. I said there must be something wrong with me. There must be something wrong with me as a human being. There must be something wrong with the way I am as a person for me to drive someone to go off on a business trip and have an affair. So, but I would definitely say there are questions, particularly if you're going to be staying together, there are questions that you do want to have answered, because you want to know, how does this reflect on where we are? What do we need to do to resolve this? And what are the areas that you want to be working on and focusing on? So there are questions there that do need to be answered, but the granular level of detail that I was going to, I'd say that's probably not a good idea for anyone, because we all have an imagination. Even if you're not visual in, those terms, your mind is still going to probably run scenarios.
It's so true. Actually, everyone's agreeing with you here. Tarinder said, thank you for this, because you've mentioned actually everything I thought and went through myself. And we've also got another question I need to know is about trying to get some sort of control when you're feeling out of control about everything. And also when they've been carrying on without you knowing, needing to know everything becomes quite extreme. So it's quite true, I think it is. So, when you're going through that, you are tormented by that information, and it is going to be all consuming. And I think that's something that is part of that shock process that you go through when you find out your partner's having an affair. And it is devastating, because it's like a little mini bomb going off in your entire life. And then you have that decision, well, do I stay or do I go? Do I stay or do I go? Now, in my situation, I didn't really have a lot of choice about that. My ex moved on. But for, and that was devastating. And some people don't have the choice. And also remember, there's people out there who maybe have had affairs that might be watching this. And it's not always, do you think, Marilyn, that having an affair is always wrong? It's a good question, right?
I have to take a deep breath, because now this comes down to, I guess if I'm going to choose a word, it's about your morals, I guess. For some people, it's a religious proposition. For me personally, I'm like, look, if you're in a relationship and it's not working, finish the relationship you're in and then go to the next one. Don't cross them over. That's my personal thing. I just don't like the idea of, as we used to say back in the day, carrying on behind someone's back. So for me, I don't like the idea. However, because a few years ago, I did a coaching program around this sort of thing. It was an audio coaching thing. And I thought, I'm going to interview people and I'm going to invite all sections. I want the third wheel as well. So I want to know from the person who's been cheated on. I want to know from the person who's had the affair. And I want to know I want to hear from the lover, the third person, the extra person in the relationship. When you actually hear some of the reasons why people had affairs, it's not for me the right or wrong thing, it's just interesting. And the most common thing, as many of you who've been cheated on will have heard, or even if somebody's propositioned you in a bar, my partner just doesn't understand me. And let me just break that down a bit more, because that just sounds so trite and almost insulting. What many were saying, particularly those who were devastated themselves, they said they didn't feel loved. They didn't feel wanted. They didn't feel cared for. So someone now wanders onto the radar and says, hey, I love your hair, Sarah. Sarah, that's a really beautiful dress. Wow, the sleeves on that are so unusual. If the partner that sits right next to you every day hasn't even noticed that you've had your hair done, didn't notice the dress, no interest in the design of the sleeves, even though that's one of the really interesting features, it's understandable almost that you sort of go, wow, somebody's noticed. Somebody sees me and they're actually paying attention to me. And that is very intoxicating. So I'm not saying it's right, but I do have an appreciation of how it happens. But now I'm saying, right, okay, if that's pushing your buttons, we now know there's something that's not happening in your relationship. There's potentially something that's missing. Go and resolve that before you chase after the person who's made you kind of feel good.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I totally agree with you. I do see people in my clinic maybe who are in abusive relationships and they can't get out for lots of reasons. And I think sometimes in those circumstances, you know, love and connection is the number one human need. And if you're not getting that from your partner, but you're trapped and you can't get out, then I think sometimes, yeah, we can't judge. You know, I know that, you know, morally people frown on it. And obviously in a lot of circumstances, yes, absolutely. But there might be situations where people are trapped. And I do have quite a few scenarios like that. But again, you know, if you can get out, and then that's the best way to do it, or communicate and try and improve. Because if things aren't right, then you've got a chance to go back and improve the relationship. But I think really on this webinar, we're really focusing on the people that have been left, the people that have been cheated on, the people that have gone through that awful betrayal, and don't know what to do about it. Now, we've got some great comments in here. People are saying, he wouldn't tell me. I wanted to know, but he wouldn't tell me, and he lied about it. So she went to extreme measures to find out. I'm not sure if it helped, but the lack of knowledge tormented me. He's still having the affair, but I don't need to know the details. Well, that's an interesting one. And I think, or this one here, we've never been truly tested. When it comes down to it, would we succumb? And then someone's asking, what about if you're single, but they're still married? So that's the other dynamic, isn't it? Because, you know, having had that done to me, you know, I just fundamentally know how it can rip your heart out and destroy a family. I had a son at the time. So, you know, I know how difficult in the moment that is. Now, I'm actually friendly with the lady that had the affair with my ex now, and we get on fine. You know, we're not best friends, but we are friendly and we can communicate about certain things. We're quite different, but it works. And I think, you know, that's time though. I mean, asking me to do that in the moment would have been a bit more of a challenge. But I think, you know, if you're single and you're dating someone that's married, then I think you've really got to question, but what are they looking for here? You know, if they can do it to their wife or their husband, then they're going to be able to do that to you too. So I think it's really looking at, why are you caught up? Is it the, you know, the excitement of not really being able to have that person? I don't know. What do you think, Marilyn?
For me, I see this a bit like stuff. If I know that this belongs to someone, I'm not going to claim it as my own. So if I know that someone is already in a relationship, I then, a bit like you said, my brain automatically goes, well, hold on a minute. If they're doing this to their partner, I could be one in a long line, and people have to go, is that okay? And I cannot help nowadays but think about the partner at home. And I have, the only situation where I've heard where someone might have a slightly different take on this is, I had a client, his wife was unwell. They had sat down and talked about it. And because she knew she was not in a position to sleep with him, they had an agreement that in terms of that part of their relationship, he could go out and meet other women. That's a very unique situation. However, it seems very common, because I've heard people saying, oh, it's all right, me and my partner have talked about this, we don't sleep together. And I'm like, really? You know, so oftentimes that's part of the rhetoric and the patter that people use. For me personally, I'd be like, if you're already in a relationship, regardless of the stage of that, if you're in a relationship, and there was one guy tried to convince me. I said, what's your wife's number? Dial the number, let me speak to her. And I said, let me see the phone, flick through, because I spoke to a male friend about this. What he did, there's a female friend that he's got in his phone, and it's wifey. So if anyone ever challenges, he says, ring my wife. I'm like, I've seen all the tricks before, and clients will tell me about those tricks in sessions. So I was like, no, you're not catching me like that. So before I said what I said, let me see your phone. Is your wife in your phone? Yeah, of course she is. Where? Show me. So showed me. So now you can't trick me by calling up wifey number, because now you just show me. And I'm like, all right, then give her a call. Let me speak to her. I want to know that this is okay. Now I know that's never going to happen. And even if it did, I wouldn't want to go there anyway. So for me, I'm like, no. If you're in a relationship, do what needs to be done in that relationship. And if it's not working, you leave. And then you can go on to meet other people and have a great time and da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. But I'm like, it's messy, because somebody, even when someone says, no, I know they're married, it's just sex, sooner or later, well, I'm going to use the term that Jada Pinkett Smith used, the entanglement can then get a bit more complicated. And I have, from my perspective, someone tends to, 8 times out of 10, tends to get hurt.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. I mean, and hurting other people, the repercussions, it might be a bit of fun for you, but actually it's a lot more than that. If someone's got a home with somebody, if someone's, got children with somebody, it really can be very devastating. And so it's about really just being considerate of other people too, I think. But I mean, that's the challenge, isn't it? Sometimes when it happens to you, you can't believe that somebody else would actually participate in something that would hurt someone so much. So I guess we've got to consider all those things.
Well, it's all those hormones, and that whole thing about feeling good, feeling attractive, feeling like, oh, I still got it. It's really, 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 really intoxicating. So I get it. It's just that I've lived so long with seeing the aftermath of that in my work and living it personally that I'm like, it's a quick fix. It's a nice solution in the moment, but actually the aftermath is a bigger proposition.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. So, I mean, going back to the question of should you stay or should you go, you stayed, right? You stayed.
Yeah, however, not because I really wanted to. Let me qualify that. I stayed initially because I had plans, hopes, dreams, aspirations for what our life and our future was going to be. And I did not feel emotionally, physically, or even financially ready to let that go. So because I couldn't conceive of being on my own, it was just too much going on at once. The only seemingly sensible option was to hang on. So if I'm really honest, although if you'd seen me at the time and said, yeah, I really want the relationship to work, I did love this person. He was amazing. He is still amazing. He's an amazing human being, just with some flaws, like we all do. So I would have been honest on one level that I did love him. I did love what we had before all of the revelations. And part of the reason for staying is because I was too afraid of the alternative, and therefore it was easier to stay than to go. So one of the things I often say to people is, number one, don't make any rush decisions, because it is a really tumultuous time. So you need time to take stock. To somebody to say to you in the moment, or even a week after it's happened, well, what do you want to do? Is too soon often. You haven't had time for the dust to settle, all of the pieces now to reformulate themselves. We went to counselling as well. That was at my insistence, because I realised that I'd started to mess with my own head with all of my questions and all the rest of it, and things going round and round and round. So I'm like, okay, I think we need an outside party to come into for this. I think it was absolutely torture for him. So I wouldn't force a partner into that. If they said, no, not interested, I'd be like, okay, fair enough. Because it's not pleasant when one person really doesn't want to be there. So did all of that. And I would say that on the face of it, because the first time it happened, no one had a clue. The outside world was completely oblivious. We'd be out, smiles, but behind the scenes, when it happened a second time, a few years later, I could not in good conscience stay. I'm like, there's no way, I cannot now. And actually, I think I would have been moving into your scenario where he wouldn't have wanted to stay either, where he was then thinking about forming a relationship with this new person, not the first one, but the second one. So now if I didn't make the decision to go, all right, I'm out, he would have done it anyway. And that probably would have been even more devastating for me. So it's like, let me just leave now before it all gets out of hand.
And I think maybe that's a good distinction, that if you decide to stay and your partner wants to work on it with you, then there's something in that they still care about you, and you haven't been abandoned or rejected, I suppose, as to the same extreme as if they decide they don't want to be with you. And thank God you found out, because they're moving on quite happily. So that's a different scenario. And actually, that is what I see most of in my coaching clinic, the people that have been left. And it's an absolute shock to most people that they've actually done it, and sometimes it's, it's like they found out about the affair. Sometimes it's suspicions. Sometimes it's, you know, it's someone else. Actually, is a client of mine at the moment, someone else told her, who's friends with both of them, and they couldn't live with it anymore. And they said, I've got to tell you, when he was away on a business trip, he was seeing someone he works with. And it took her a week to actually speak to her husband about it. She couldn't do it, because you go into that absolute shock of like, what's going on? And then looking back, there were signs, but we don't see it. So how can we spot the signs, Marilyn, if someone's cheating on us? Are there some obvious signs?
Well, this is an interesting one. In the moment, often not. But one of the things that I found, and I really think this is what my partner was doing, because he's a decent human being and was not enjoying the mental side of this either. And I say the mental side because there's the mental side, there's the emotional side, there's the physical side. But when I talk about the mental side, it's like, what does it do to your head to see your partner there? You're kind of living a lie, and they've got no idea that you're living a lie. So there was that side, and he wasn't coping with that particularly well. So that's where the outburst would come from. The flying off the handle at the simplest of things. I'd be thinking, I've said that a million times, or I've asked that question a million times. You're like, it's just so simple. I remember one of the days I'd said, oh, what's on tonight? Because we often would say, what's on tonight? What are we doing? Are we going to... I said, oh, what's on tonight? He said, I don't know. I said, oh, can you have a quick note? Why should I? And I was like, whoa, you know, it was that sort of thing. And I was like, this is really weird. What's going on? But actually, because I didn't want to really see what was going on consciously, I wasn't really paying attention. By the same token, there were sometimes we're at the other extreme, because it's like a continuum. At the other extreme, he was really, I remember we went shopping to Bicester Village, you know, one of these outlet places. He was insisting on buying me stuff, and I mean quite expensive stuff. Now, I really wish I'd said yes to that Donna Karan coat, because I could have been rocking that today. It was so gorgeous. But I remember being in the store and saying, no, I can't. Even though he's my partner, I'm saying, no, this is too much, because I'm looking at the handful of shopping I've got. I'm like, no. And I kept saying, don't be silly. No, I'm fine. No. And so I then actually pretended I didn't like it as much as I did, because I felt guilty. I was like, what the heck's going on here? So it was the overly generous, and I guess that's the way of compensating as well, to sort of make up for it in a more material way. So when I look back with hindsight, I'm like, man, the signs were littered. They were all over the place. Had I been looking, but I wasn't really looking. And even if I was, I wouldn't have wanted to put 2 and 2 together and make 4. I would have just said, oh, you know, because I said, you know, said to myself, he said to me, there's just a lot of stress at work, a lot of pressure. But yeah, there was a whole long list of signs that are there. When I lay them out for people and go, here they are. I remember doing a webinar on it, and I just laid them all out, and people are like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. But then what I said, look, we cannot take these signs in isolation. One of the signs, for example, was having a family car, seeing a lot more mileage on it, even when you know there hasn't been a lot of stuff going on. There can be things like that as well. I said, you can't take this at face value. Now we've got to qualify that. I don't know if people here are English and you've been around a little while. There was Coughgate. There's a program called Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? And there was a questions were being asked. Someone in the audience was coughing. You know, people cough. However, the producers started to notice a pattern. So now they're listening more intently, and they recognize whenever the person didn't know the answer and they'd use that phone a friend or ask the audience or the person would cough in a particular way. And so this whole scandal broke, and sure enough, the person in the hot seat had someone in the audience who was coughing the answers. So I say, look, you can't now say that you could be in a place and somebody coughs and it means there's something scandalous going on. You've got to look at the bigger picture. You've got to see it in context. You can't just pull one sign out of thin air and go, there, you see, you have flown off the handle, or you bought me a gift on a, you know, and it's not my birthday. You can't do that, but you have to look at the bigger picture. But when you start to look at the bigger picture and take the whole thing in context, then it kind of stands out like a beacon.
Yeah, it does. Little things as well that I notice, like you're having a password on the phone suddenly, and then making an extra effort getting ready to go out. Even asking me, do you think this goes with this, or do you think I should wear this, or which aftershave? I'm thinking, yes, it's a lot of effort for this business meeting, but yeah, I was just looking after myself. Yeah, and then in hindsight, you're like, oh my goodness, But hindsight is a wonderful thing, isn't it? And also, you know, I have clients who have, say, discovered receipts for things, and never seen the jewelry or the underwear or whatever the receipt was for themselves, but waited to see if it was going to show up and not brought it up. And then, you know, maybe waited for Christmas or a birthday or a special occasion and not told anyone about it. And I think denial is something that quite often we go into in that stage, where we know that if they are having an affair, that's going to have such a massive, devastating effect on our life that we don't want to go there. So we sort of tuck it away in the back of our minds until we're strong enough to deal with it sometimes, or just until it gets to a point where it's either obvious or the cat's out the bag and you found out, or they're suddenly leaving. And then looking back, it's like, actually, there were signs. And I think, if, you know, a way to learn from this to help you moving forward is to make sure, if you have been cheated on, that you look back and say, well, what were the signs? Because a lot of people say to me, oh, I can't trust going into another relationship. I'll never trust anyone ever again. But the challenge is, it's not about trusting somebody else. I believe it's about trusting you to choose better and spot the signs so that you can take your control back. If you understand what the signs are and you're not blinkered and pushing them away, then you're more likely to spot them as they come along. And also, if the relationship's starting to fizzle out, looking at why, so that that doesn't happen again. I think we've got to learn the lessons so that we can bank them. And I think if we had sort of done things differently, maybe a couple of months before, or took a different path, maybe those things wouldn't have happened. Maybe they would. But, you know, understanding and taking responsibility is a really key thing. Don't you think, Marilyn?
And that whole thing about trust, because I was exactly the same. I was like, hold on a minute, how could I put so many years into this relationship, not seeing what was happening? And then second time round, I did feel completely duped, because now I'd had the assurances, the apologies, I would never do it again. I don't know what I was thinking, da 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 da. And so second time round, I felt completely stupid, and as though I'd been taken advantage of and played for a fool, etc. But trust was a big one, because I said those words myself. How on earth, you know, sitting there crying and like, how on earth am I ever going to trust anyone again? And then when I became a coach and therapist, I was like you said, it's not about me. How do I trust? It's like knowing myself, because when I looked back, I'm like, I saw, and I the whole thing with the receipts, I remember looking at a receipt, because I used to, you know, get everything in order, you know, get everything ready for the accountant, etc. I was like, this is interesting. There have been several of these receipts where clearly he's got a friend who likes a particular sweet kind of drink, which you would typically associate with a woman, but anybody can drink anything they want. And when he, you know, those nights where he was out with the boys, I noticed that it was always dinner for two. Yeah, I knew there were several boys. So clearly the boys had all given up drinking, you know, because everything was on one bill. And I was like, this is interesting. And I do remember looking at the receipt and going, but then you second guess yourself potentially. Am I reading too much into this? Seeing something that isn't there? Yeah. And then it all spirals out of control again. And that's where people can be accusing their partners when actually nothing is going on. So there's that balance. But I really did find it was a sense of trusting self. So I know when the radar comes up, I know how my intuition speaks to me. And I recognize that voice that says, hold on a minute, something here isn't right. And now with my logical, objective head on, I will go forth and examine the evidence, look at what's going on. But it was about trusting myself rather than it being all of these outside forces. So absolutely agree.
Yeah. Do you think once a cheater, always a cheater?
I hope not, because as human beings, like, put it this way, people often say, oh my God, like I was in Curry's looking for a TV and I've been in there like 2 hours. It's like, oh gosh. And so I'm standing, the guy is ringing up a cell before mine and the music's on. And I'm like, and I wasn't even thinking, he looked at me and he went, are you always this jolly? And I went, actually, yeah, I am. Now, for the first 32 years of my life, I was completely miserable, angry, withdrawn. I'm naturally very quiet and very shy anyway. I was awful. I was not the sort of person that you would want to really have around. I know how much I've changed. So if I can go from moody and miserable and actually pretty vindictive to the woman now who's like joyfully dancing around Curry's and, you know, and all that sort of stuff and just having a chat with anyone and going, actually, do you know what? let me just give you a website for that, all that. If I know how much I have changed once, you know, got into personal development. So I'm like, no, if I can almost have a personality change, a complete personality change, I think that anything is possible. And there are people out there who are devastated by what it's done to them and their partner, their family. They'd never want to go through that again. And it's like, been there, done that, not for me. And then there are other people who are the serial cheaters who, regardless of what comes out of their mouth, you know, we know there's something else completely going on. And they're, you know, what we used to call the players back in the day. There are those people, but I do actually think that we as humans have the capacity to change. You got to want to do it though.
Yeah, well, that's quite interesting coming from someone whose partner then went on and did it again. So the fact that you still hold those beliefs is great, because I also think that's one person, you know, and again, I think it's a lot on our responsibility to pick better partners. You know, if someone has cheated in the past, then you know that it is on their radar and they were capable of doing that at one point. Now, have they changed or not? I guess that's for you to work out. But if you are vulnerable to that, or it's something that you really don't want to go there, finding that out could be a reason not to get involved with that person. So, you know, I think it's, again, you know, forgiveness about, you know, well, that was then, and if they are remorseful, that's one thing. But if you are particularly vulnerable to that and you have trust issues anyway, I've seen it so many times where clients will say, yeah, but he's cheated before. And it's like, yeah, but he's being incredibly kind and loving, and they were very remorseful about what they did. But they're still holding on to the fact that even though they are showing up and they obviously have changed in a lot of ways, that they did it before. So if you're going to be hanging on to that, and that's something that's going to be difficult for you, then I would avoid those relationships, you know, and filter, put that on your ideal partner list. I do a great exercise with my clients, which is how to design your ideal partner, which really puts everything on there that you want, because we all know what we want, don't we? Whether it's tall, dark, handsome, short, blonde, blue eyes. We just need to look at Love Island at the moment. Everyone's got their type on paper, ticks all the boxes on paper, all this rubbish that's going up. It's quite funny. But it's all about the physical looks. But what we need to also do is put in the things that people enjoy, their education, maybe their family values. You know, do they like family? Are they going to get on with your friends and family, or are they not that kind of person? You know, really looking beneath the lid of what you see to actually take responsibility for designing that partner. But importantly, not just what you want, but also what you need. And what you need might be someone that's honest and loyal, someone that has, you know, a good sense of humor, whatever it is for you. But focusing on what you need as well, which is where you learn the lessons from the mistakes in the past. And then we have these 5 must not haves on there, which are absolute deal breakers. So for some of you, it might be, you know, cheated in the past. Well, if that comes up, you deploy your parachute, you get the hell out of there straight away. You don't just give it a go and then end up getting hurt. Or it might be that they lie, or they're unkind, or they're selfish, or they smoke, or they don't like kids, whatever. But I think doing that exercise actually really helps you fine-tune what you do want. Because a lot of the time we focus on what we don't want. But, you know, Marilyn, that saying about what you focus on, you attract. So, you know, if you're focusing on what you don't want, you're going to see more of those potential partners. So, yeah, I think getting some clarity is really important. Do you agree, Marilyn?
Absolutely, and that's a similar place to where I start. And I remember when the Spice Girls were coming out, I had a section called "Tell Me What You Want, What You Really, Really Want," because many people have no idea, and we will put more time and energy into choosing a television, you know, because I was doing my research and doing comparison tables and asking questions and all of that. And I'm not suggesting that is how you approach a relationship. Your first date, you come out with your scroll of, you know, great big 120 questions, although there are some really great questions you can ask. However, that whole thing about having clarity on what you want, and I say it's about a clean want. What I mean by that is somebody can say they really want trust in a relationship, but if trust is intertwined with being cheated on, betrayed, all the rest of it, it's not clean. So even when a partner displays those very things, because you have so much attachment to it and it's a negative attachment, it starts bringing all of that stuff to the surface. And that's why I've always been a big proponent of releasing what I call the old emotional baggage. Because if you don't, a bit like your regular baggage, if you're staying overnight at someone's house, you turn up with your stuff. If you're getting into a relationship, you turn up with your stuff. We've all got stuff. I haven't met anyone who hasn't got stuff. However, when your stuff starts spilling out and it's out of control, it gets dumped onto the other party, and you can potentially also start seeing things that aren't there because you are coloured by what you brought with you. So that's why I'm saying clean up first before taking all of that and projecting it onto another human being.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we've got a couple of questions here. What about if he can't decide if he wants the other woman or he wants to stay and carries on the affair while deciding? What do you think about that, Marilyn?
I don't know if I should say this. At university, we called it double dipping, where, you know, you've got, it's like you go to a buffet, you're like, oh, can't decide. And where it's one of those eat as much as you like buffets, you can take your satay stick and you can dip it into as many sauces as you like.
Yeah.
I'd say that's not really fair on the partner. So this is now sometimes where, rather than the other party deciding, you decide. Is it all right for you to sit and wait while they test run both of you? Or are you like, look, if you don't know, if it's that close a call and you're undecided, clearly it's not me.
Yeah, but that can be really hard, right? Because you're there, maybe you've got kids, maybe you've been with them a long time, maybe you live together, there's a lot invested. It can be really hard to say, right, well, I'm out then, because what if they were going to come back? You've got that sort of unrealized hope of the potential they're going to come back and that it's all going to be okay if you just sat it out. But if you walk away, then they're going to go headlong into that relationship, and then if they're headlong into that relationship, you've got less chance of winning them back. So that could be an interesting dilemma.
Absolutely. And I would say, and this is where good communication and conversation comes into it, because it's not a one-sided deal. So this is where you're sitting with your partner and that whole thing about, okay, let's look at what we want, what I would call in my line of work, and you probably call it something similar or have something similar, the relationship values. Looking at those and seeing where they fit and seeing where they're out of alignment, because that's going to give you a lot of information. Also looking at, okay, where has this gone wrong? And is it possible that this can be repaired? I love that whole, something like kintsugi, the Japanese art of repairing what has been broken with gold. Because there are times, and I've had clients who come in as a couple, their relationship is stronger as a result of the affair, because they both had a wake-up call. They both realized this is actually what they do want. It was brought up in the cold light of day, and when the possibility was there that they were going to lose that, suddenly they got focused. And it was the opportunity to say, actually, this in the relationship has not been working, isn't working. What can we do about it? And there are those things that are deal breakers. Now, if there are deal breakers on the table, I always say, look, if that's who they are and how they are, and they stay the same, is that okay?
Yeah.
Got to be clear on that one, because you can't yes but it, because there'll be things that, and I was working with someone recently, and they were talking about all the things that annoy them about their partner. I said, were they like that when you met them? Oh yeah. You know, so it's like, hold on a minute then. So what's changed? What's different? Oh, well, it's annoying now. I'm like, that's not fair. Now you have to talk about this, see what can be done. But if it truly is a massive deal breaker, that's where the rubber hits the road and you make a decision. Where do we go from here? But I would say communication is key. But I don't think it's fair on either party if they both know that they're kind of being used. It's like, no, you need to talk about this one and figure that thing out and say what needs to be in place for either us to stay together or to make the decision that it is time for us to reevaluate where we are and where we go from here. So it's not a straight out, no, good, I'm out like the dragon's den. But there's a conversation that needs to be had in terms of, let's get clear, where do we go from here? Where do you want to go from here? Because that's a big one. What do you want?
Yeah. And there's also an argument for, you asserting your own boundaries, your self-worth, thinking about, is this how you deserve to be treated? And clearly not. And so maybe over the years, your self-confidence has dropped a little bit and maybe you're struggling with that. So it's a good time maybe even to get a coach to start working through, how can I rebuild my self-reliance? I think a lot of people become very codependent in relationships and tolerate really bad behavior, should we call it that? In this case, having an affair knowingly, which must be torturous for you. We tolerate that because we're not sure how we're going to cope on the outside, if we'll ever find anyone else, if we can even do the day-to-day stuff. And obviously there's financial reasons and other reasons why we stay, which can be really difficult. But actually starting to build your self-reliance by sort of, when things come up, instead of running to your partner or running to maybe a friend or family member that is always there to support you, asking yourself, okay, well, what would I think is the best thing to do in this situation? So you start to figure out what you would do and work through the problems on your own. And then, of course, you can still go and pick up the phone and say, hey, dad, hey, mum, what do I do here? Or to your best mate. But it's you learning first, because then you'll see, actually, yeah, I did get it right, or they agree with me. So, yeah, I can do this. And slowly over a period of time, then you can start to get your independence back a little bit more. So maybe you are in a position to say, no, I'm actually going to go. But, I think getting your ducks in a line at that point is also really important. Like, if it does go wrong, start planning for what life would look like. So it's not a black hole. Quite a lot of the time, it's just the fear is not knowing what anything else looks like, because this is what you've done for so long. So actually, I know it's painful, but actually thinking, okay, well, if I was going to redesign my life a different way, what would I have in it? Where would I go? Where would we live? What would we do? How would we make ends meet? How would we do that? And actually putting a plan together so that if it does happen, it's not quite as devastating as if it doesn't. So I think, again, it's important to have your backup plan for you sorted out, so you've got a little bit of a safety net with that.
And
is that what you would advise,
Marilyn? Point, Sarah, about the confidence and self-esteem. I had low confidence anyway. I wouldn't have said that. It wasn't something I was aware of. I just thought I was very quiet and shy. But I know now I was lacking in confidence, had low self-esteem. So when this happened, it was a blow to my confidence and to my self-esteem. And one of the biggest emotions I felt was shame. I was completely embarrassed that my partner needed to go off and sleep with someone else. So didn't tell anyone. But that whole thing about confidence and self-esteem, because I don't know about you, but there are times where I meet women who are seemingly super confident, very self-assured, except for this one area. In the relationship, they're almost in that subservient sort of doormat position and don't have the confidence and don't have the self-esteem. So confidence is a really big part of it, because when your self-esteem is low, you can actually find yourself thinking, well, or at least you can talk yourself into all sorts of stuff and almost be grateful for the little morsels that you get. Whereas when your confidence is kind of more solid, that's where part of your brain goes, hold on a minute, I don't think so. So confidence and self-esteem is a really big piece of the puzzle, because when that starts building up, that's where people can more easily transition into looking at what life might potentially be like beyond the scenario. Whereas if you're like, oh my gosh, it's too much to even sometimes think about.
Absolutely, I agree. Well, we've got lots of questions coming in, and we've got just about 12 minutes left, so I want to go to the questions. Before we go there, man, tell people how they can find you if people want to follow you or find out more about the courses and coaching that you do.
Oh yeah, cool. So my name, I'll spell my name and I'll spell the website and email, because it's a bit of an unusual spelling. It's Marilyn at transformationstm.com. So that's my email. Marilyn is Marilyn, same spelling as Marilyn Monroe. And then at trance, TRANCE, F for Freddie, so FORMATIONS. So Marilyn at transformationstm.com. The main website is transformationstm.com. And then there's kind of an e-learning online coaching platform, which is transformationstm.newsendler.com. But just drop me an email. I can send you kind of any links. And on social media, majority of the time it's / Marilyn Devonish, and Devonish is DEV for Victor, ONISH, except for Instagram, which is a Neuro Success Coach. So fairly easy to find.
Yeah, awesome. And also, I'd just like to mention I'm running a retreat coming up actually next week on how to divorce a difficult person and recover from a toxic relationship. So when you are in that situation, do check out my website, saradavison.com, for more information on that. Right, let's get to the questions, because we have a few. Okay. What can I do as my husband refuses to speak to me and sort things out, even though he was the one who cheated? Marilyn, do you want to go first on that?
So when it first started for me, I'll talk about that, and then some of the approaches I've used with clients. For me, I said, I cannot, if you want to continue, and he said he did. I said, if you want to continue, I cannot move beyond this unless I've got some answers. So that's how we then got into the situation where I took it too far. Let's be clear, I took it too far with the letters, but that's a whole different story. One of the things I would often say is, look, okay, it might be challenging then for your partner and you and your partner to sit down, but this is where somebody, a third party comes in, coach, counselor, therapist, whatever route people decide to take. Now, I know for the partner that doesn't want to speak, that can be like, oh my goodness, the worst thing ever, but this is what needs to happen. In my case, I says, look, and that's how we got to the counseling. I says, if you're not willing to do this, then I can't carry on with this. So it's, are we going to talk? If so, what's going to be the best mechanism for us to do this? Because if you really want the relationship to continue, please hear me when I say there are things that I believe we need to talk about in order to repair the relationship, resolve some of the things that have been going on. And if the partner really does want to see the relationship continue, this may be one of the parameters that is required in order for you to move beyond it, past it, resolve it, and move on to the next stage. So for me, it wasn't a, does he want to, does he not want to? It's like, the question was, do you want the relationship to continue? And here are some of the things that are important that I feel are necessary. We need to talk to a professional.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I think it is important to find a way to communicate. But I guess if there is a situation where someone doesn't want to, quite often they don't want to go into the details. Maybe they're ashamed, maybe they feel guilty, maybe they just don't want to hurt you, maybe they don't care. I don't know. It could be any of those things. But actually, one of the other things that I've found is that even if your partner doesn't really want to engage in talking or doing anything, one of the things that I saw, I had a male client who came to me and he said, look, my wife's leaving me. She's not happy with me. She doesn't want to go to therapy. She doesn't want to do anything. And I don't know what to do. So we sat down and we worked out a plan. And you can do this with a coach or you can do this on your own, but work out what you think they would like to see. Things that you could do to make them feel valued. Now, I know he's cheated, so it could be difficult to sort of doing things. But obviously the relationship has broken down. So there's a communication issue somewhere. Something's gone off kilter. So maybe if you can start making changes on your own, like my client did, suddenly his wife was like, oh, well, hang on. If you'd have done this a few years ago or a few months ago, I never even mentioned any of this about leaving. I love this you when you show up like this. But what happened? And he said, well, I've been seeing a coach and she's told me to sort of step up and start doing some things a bit differently. And then they started to open up. She started to open up. They ended up then having a more open discussion about things. So maybe there's something there where you can start making some changes that are so obvious that your partner then starts to respond. Because one thing's for sure, if you keep on doing the things you've always done, you're going to get the same results. So we need to do something different. And if they're not prepared to change, then as almost like a last ditch attempt, if you want to stay and walk away with no regrets, try some changes, do it yourself and just see if they want you. But also I think it's important to work out what you want. Do you want to be with somebody who is like that, who can treat you like that? Because that again is another really interesting area to look at.
And one other thing, Sarah, I often say, because I'm working with a couple at the moment, they're out in Australia. So I've spoken to them together, but there are also sections we do apart, because there are often things that your partner does want to say about you, but you know, once it's said, it can't be unsaid. Once it's heard, it can't be unheard. So it may be that he doesn't want to talk to you in terms of the person who's posed this question, but now the proposition is talk to someone. And when I say someone, I don't mean your mate down the pub necessarily. I mean someone professional, a bit like Sarah's saying now, because they will have that discussion. And I'm sure many of us have been in the position, you could say something to a family member, a partner, till you're blue in the face. You might have said it 2 gazillion times. Complete stranger wanders in, says it once, and it's the best thing since sliced bread. So that's often what happens, where people get what I call the penny dropping aha moment, and suddenly it opens up. So the conversation doesn't have to involve you per se, but could they speak to someone?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's very good advice. I absolutely agree. There's another one here. He wouldn't answer all my questions, so I had to ask her instead, which was difficult. She said she thought they were in love. He has since blocked her and claims it was just casual, no love. I can't work out who's telling the truth.
Oh, that's an interesting one. That is an interesting one. And when I interviewed the other person, the third person in the scenario, there were times where, like, one of them, for example, got into the relationship believing that he was single and then found out. Now, by that time, they had fallen in love with them, genuinely so. And then when they were saying, yes, but my partner doesn't understand me and we're not sleeping together anymore, da 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 da, he was kind of holding out hope that they would be a relationship further down the line, just had to get his wife more stable so that when he left, she didn't do anything silly, as he put it. So there can be those times where someone genuine, and even if it does, that's why I say with the entanglements bit, someone can start off thinking it's just about sex, but then feelings get ignited, and then before you know, everything's kind of out of control. So that's a tricky one. Now, in terms of who do you believe, if you don't have the opportunity to have any further contact, this is one where your imaginations can run rings around you. So for me, I'm often like, if you haven't got the communication in terms of what's happened in the past, the question becomes, where do we go from here? What is our next step in moving forward, regardless who's right, who's wrong, who's telling the truth, who's lying? And if you're in a position where you're like, wow, you look at someone and you perceive them to be a liar, that's now, I'm like, okay, that's something that also you want to sort out in the relationship, because it's not particularly healthy to be sitting across the dining room table with someone or having them next to you on the sofa and doubting every word that comes out of their mouth. That turns quite toxic, because even if they are telling the truth, the processes that will run in your head, understandably so, can start causing chaos and havoc in the relationship. And that then brings us right back to, we need to talk and we need to get some things ironed out.
Yeah, I mean, trust is the foundation of any relationship. And if that is gone, then, I mean, it is possible to build it back. But, you know, I think everyone's got their own views, haven't they? Whether it's right or wrong. Should you stay? Should you go? Can you forgive? Can you not? This is very personal. It's very personal to you. There's no right or wrong. You know, some people can forgive and stay. You know, I always thought in my world, if someone ever cheated on me, I'd be out. Now, in my case, I didn't really have much of a choice. But the thing was, I was out. As soon as I found out, I was like, well, I'm done. So when I then found out, well, he was quite happy about that. That was just, well, that, you know, like you said, the second time round that your partner cheated, you're like, well, I'm going to get out first. You know, sometimes that is the best way. But I think everybody is different and there is no right and wrong. And if you want to work on it, do work on it. Try, do your best, because there's nothing worse than leaving a relationship and then thinking, I've got big regrets about that. You know, it's best to work through everything, communicate, as Marilyn's been saying, you know, discuss things if you can. If you can't, be the change you want to see and see if that makes any difference. I think that's important. But one last question here that I'm going to cover, because I know there's lots of questions, but do you think there's a difference between an affair and a long-term relationship? I've just found out my husband's been in a relationship with another woman for 4.5 years. And because we've been living apart because of job-related reasons, it's obviously been more than an affair, more like a relationship. Or would you not make a distinction? What do you think, Marilyn?
If we went to the dictionary about the affair, it really is that whole thing about illicit sexual relations with someone else. So that essentially for me is kind of where it's at. It's not, it could be a one-night stand, or it could be something that's gone on longer over a period of number of years, but I would still put it under that same thing. It's an affair in terms of the pure definition of how you would define that word. The fact that it's going on for longer, now it could be the affair has turned into a relationship, but I wouldn't be making a distinction. It would still be someone is having an affair and it's been going on for a long time, so they have now formed a relationship, which can be really hard, because I know it's going to sound strange, particularly if someone hasn't been in this position, but many of the people that I've worked with over the last 20 years, when I first got into practice, I was a relationship coach for the first 9 years. I had an agony aunt page with a magazine called Heals Health, and then I had an agony aunt and coaching page for a magazine called Spirit and Destiny for 7 years. So this is a sort of conversation that would come up a lot, and people would try and change the name of it to make it a bit more palatable. I'm like, it is what it is, but the intimacy, outside of sex, the intimacy of having a conversations, the sharing of laughter, those little things that you know each other, for many that's even more devastating than the sexual side of the relationship, because that is when you open yourself up to another person, you share parts of yourself, you bare your soul. That's really intimate, and that can sometimes be just as painful, if not more so, than saying, oh, they slept with someone. So I wouldn't necessarily be making the distinction between what I would call it. For me, it's an affair, but the fact is it's been going on for several years now. I don't know if it depends on your age, but it did resurface a few months ago. There was a TV show called Friends. One of the most famous lines is, "We were on a break," where Ross and Rachel would split up. So Ross sleeps with a woman in I think it was a photocopy shop, and then Rachel finds out about it, but she's all upset. But he's saying, well, we were on a break. We're on a break. And so this whole storyline ran, throughout the years that it was on. So that comes back to, okay, you're living separately. Was there an agreement there in terms of how you would conduct yourselves, even though you were separated? If the agreement was you're kind of living separate lives, then this might be the product of that. But if the agreement was you're still in a relationship, you're just not geographically together all the time, that brings us back to, okay, so now this is stepping outside of that agreement and they are having an affair, but it's a long-term one which has turned into a relationship. I hope that makes sense. But again, that's just Marilyn's view of the day. You don't have to take that as gospel, but that's the way that I see that in my mind when I look at what's been shared here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I do think that as someone who's been in a one night stand, or it's been a couple of weeks, or a couple of drunken events that happened, that's one thing. But when someone has feelings, and they, like you said, I know for me it was definitely the fact that they've been talking about me, and they'd been doing things together, and they'd done trips together, and that was really hard, because you think someone's your best friend, you think they've got your back, and then to know that actually there's been a lot of deceit can be really, really hard. I think the longer that's been going on, the more intimate those moments have been, that becomes something that is harder to get over as well, I would imagine, than if you were going to stay and work on that, rather than something that was just, oh, I was drunk and it all went wrong, I'm sorry, that kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, again, it's a very big topic, and we could carry on talking for much, much longer, I know. But thank you, everybody, for joining. I know that, I know some of you are going through really tough times, but know that you will get through this. You will come out the other side, and a little bit of adversity does make you stronger, even though right now you're thinking probably, I feel terrible, but actually there is a way out. There's lots of advice and support out there. Marilyn gives some great advice. She also coaches through that, as do I. Check out my podcast, Heartbreak to Happiness, because there's loads of support and help to help you get through the other side and heal your life again, which we haven't had time to get onto today, but there's lots and lots of tips, aren't there, Marilyn, to help people power through afterwards.
Oh, absolutely. And for me, years ago, I created a coaching program called Surviving and Thriving After the Affair, because that was sort of a unique situation that if it hasn't happened, it can be challenging to know what it feels like. But for me, the key thing as I walked people through that process, we do the download, we look at the signs, we look at what did the other person say, what did the person who's cheated say, because there would be times where we'd go through, and I did an anonymous survey, people very kindly filled that in, and there'll be times I would share what someone has said, and someone else on the call would say, oh my gosh, I actually feel better now, because that's what I suspected. And I think that was, so hearing someone else's answers was powerful. However, once you've done all of that, it's like, that's cool, we've done that now let's move on to picking up the pieces, doing some healing, resolving the broken heart, and working on that confidence and that self-esteem. And that then brings a sense of trust, and even teaching people how to trust themselves, because I know if you're speaking to adults, that might seem like an odd thing to say, but many people don't trust themselves. They haven't even had the opportunity to need to test that part of their psyche. So it can be completely new territory. And then from that place and space, that's when I say to people, now you've done that, now you can start looking at what you want in the relationship. Now you can start making a decision. Do you stay or do you go? Because to do it from that place when you're in turmoil, like you said, you go, right, that's it, I'm out. And then the family is completely decimated. But when you're calmer, you're more aligned, and all of those emotions are not swirling about, you can make a much clearer decision, and you're looking at the long-term implications of that, and you're able to actually sit down and have those adult conversations rather than things coming from a knee-jerk reaction or a place of anger. Because I will be honest, the anger felt good for me to be able to just spew something out which I knew would potentially hurt the other person. And my rationale for doing that was, you've hurt me, so now I want to hurt you. But it's completely unhealthy, and that is no way to live, and I wouldn't wish that on anyone.
Yeah. So finding those healthy ways, which might be exercising or taking up boxercise or something like that. You can put their picture of their face on it even and go for it. But yeah, not actually doing it to them is probably the wisest decision. But yes. But thank you, Marilyn, for joining me. You have been, again, inspiring and so helpful. I hope you guys have enjoyed this. And you found it useful. Sending you lots of love, hoping that you get through this tough time. You will do, and you'll come out the other side stronger and happier. So lots of love. Mwah. Thanks everyone for joining.
Thanks, and thank you for all the comments. I'm just reading as someone's had a really good story. They talked about the heartbreak and then it being the best decision, how they've moved on. So thanks all for the comments and the questions as well.
Thanks guys. I'm going to put the recording up so you can find it as well. So we will be publishing the recording. So if you want to share it with anyone, please do, and take care. Lots of love.